Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of Cross Border Talks. Our today guest is a Czech Middle East expert and owner of website rebuildsyria.cz, Ondřej Krátky. And we are going to speak about a very recent and very difficult topic, and that is the current developments in Middle East or West Asia, if somebody doesn't like these old, still colonial names, so West Asia. Ondřej is a specialist for Middle Eastern affairs, and he is a graduate of West Bohemian University in Plzeň, Czechia. And we will talk with him about the large issues in the region, but also we are going to talk about a particular development in relation to Israeli policy, to current escalation towards Lebanon and other issues. And my name is Veronika Susheva Salminen, and I'm going to conduct this interview with my Bulgarian colleague Vladimir Mitev. And we have to say in the beginning of our interview that this interview is a bit special because Andre is connecting with us from Jordan, from the capital of Jordan, Amman, and he was currently staying several days or weeks in the middle of the today's crisis. He was staying in Lebanon, and he was also being in Syria. So this time we are really speaking with somebody who is not just an expert, but who was also a witness of current situation in this region. So this is, I think, something which we don't have often in our interviews. So we will see that this is not just about theoretical knowledge, which is of course important, but also about some practical and experience-based information. And based on this, Ondřej, I welcome you to our interview.
Good morning. Thank you very much for your invitation.
And I will start with a simple question based on the intro, and that is, I would like to ask you about your experience about the situation in Lebanon, what you experienced there, because we know that Lebanon is now becoming to be a target of several Israeli attacks on its territory, and this included also Beirut, where you have been staying for some days.
Well, I stayed in Beirut between something like 23rd of September and 10th of approximately 10th of October. So I had the honor to witness all these, let's say, actions or operations taking place there. Which lasted for about like 2 weeks and consisted largely of, I'd say, relatively very precise strikes on apparently pre-selected targets, mostly in what's mostly considered as the southern Beirut's southern suburbs, so-called Dahir, consisting itself of several quarters. I mean that's what was going on mostly in evening or night hours, and despite the fact that my place is relatively not very far from there, I mean a certain feeling, which is definitely not in praise of whatever the IDF or Israeli forces are taking the actions that are taken. But I mean, a certain feeling of limitedness of these strikes originated after a couple of days that might have been breached only by, let's say, the unexpected targeting of Bashura, which is relatively very much inside or close to the center. But in general, let's say, despite one or two stays out during the night on two occasions or one occasion, nothing prevented me from continuing my stay in my usual place, despite again this being like, let's say, one kilometer from the closest affected zones. What in terms of the situation that took place locally is that basically the inhabitants of the affected zones moved out in most cases before all this the series of attacks started taking place. Um, and the rest of the country obviously like try to cope with the situation by continuing normal life. By what I mean by affected communities, I obviously mean mostly the Shiite communities or the inhabitants of the southern suburbs of Beirut. I can't speak for towns like Saida or Sur or Tir in the south because I didn't go there. And the south, as such, that is, according to all indices or news, affected quite strongly. Obviously, the question is again, despite the fact that I said that all the rest of the country tries to continuing tries to continue leading normal life. The question is how long this is sustainable because some or many, I don't know if we can say many, but many, like for example, including schools, many institutions are defunct, and many businesses are down, starting being down. So, which is nothing that is the case only from this moment on, but it's been lasting for a longer time already. So this is in a nutshell how the state of things looked the moment when I was leaving the country.
Yes, maybe we can say that these Israeli attacks on Lebanon were not so surprising in a way if you look on the larger Israeli strategy these days. But still, I would like to ask you about the reasons or aims of Israeli in attacking the other sovereign state, because Lebanon is a sovereign state, and these are attacks against the sovereign state. So, what is behind it? Some commentators, for example, claim that Hezbollah is not actually the key or the most important aim or target of Israel. That the main target of Israel in current situation is the Iranian nuclear program. So, what do you think about this opinion, or is there some other motivations for such breach of the international law? Actually,
You're right. I mean, there is a variety of theories that range from scenarios of, let's say, Israeli retaliation to the Iranian nuclear program. I mean, if we leave the face value direct attack or counter attack to the to what Hezbollah has been, let's say, practicing the last year in the aftermath of the Hamas attack and the, of course, the whole history that has been there before. To scenarios of, for example, that are circulating on social networks to laying ground to something that is called Greater Israel. I mean, that should be stretching from somewhere Nile to somewhere Iraq, for example. So, in brief, the real goals are unclear, but possibly could be divinated from some, let's say, comments or remarks or methods of work or carrying out the operations, and their side effects or side or byproducts. I mean, in reality, the case is, if we take it from the point of Israel, because in this case, it's clear Israel who is the initiator of this retaliation, no matter who, what the retaliation is the answer to, what is the answer to again, and then again, the whole history. Um, then, if we speak from this point of view, then I'd say their goal, their face value, and at the same time, real goal in the first place is a detailed elimination of whatever detailed elimination of whatever that in the Israeli perspective constitute or may constitute elements of threat to them, again from their point of view, and which is in this quality almost uniquely linked to the so-called axis of resistance. But um, again, this notwithstanding, another question is, of course, why the Israelis have been permitted to do this, to carry out these retaliation steps or eliminations step by step, one by one. Let's say Gaza, then Hezbollah, possibly who knows, West Bank, and so on, Iran, of course. And here we come to your initial questions, whether or not they would refuse any possible, again, positive, in brackets, byproducts, which here means mainly territorial gains for this or other reason. For the real reason of really getting the territory, or for using it as a possible buffer zone. So on this opportunity, I have said multiple times already, and I will repeat again, the Israelis or the IDF will always get only as far as they will be allowed to. So it's very much up to the locals to which extent they are ready or willing to face them and defend themselves against these strikes, even preemptively.
Okay, this maybe brings us to another question. You said why it's Israel allowed to do these retaliations, and why Israel has such maneuver space so far. I would like to ask you actually about your evaluation of current or recent balance of power or great powers constellation in the region of West Asia, because there is an important player still, which is the United States of America. Okay, we can say that maybe they withdraw a bit in recent decade, but still United States of America is a key ally of Israel. There are Arab states, there is the axis of resistance, as you say, and they are such less traditional but expanding, I would say, players such as China. And this, what Israel is doing, is of course happening within this regional context of different balances of power and different relations between all these players. So, could you tell us something about how you evaluate this balance of power, and if there are some particular risks which can the recent Israeli policy create in the region?
I think what is happening locally is definitely happening in the shade of America or the United States having weakened a little bit, which definitely created a situation in which, let's say, various local aspirational hegemons try to, stand up to the task and to prove themselves. But in any case, to frame this, I'd say it's a local reflection of this multipolarization, or a tendency to this multipolarization of the so far unipolar, which means US controlled or hegemonized world. Or in a wider framework, it's it's still one of the branches of the fight of global oligarchs against local oligarchs in one way or another, which is maybe not exactly the case here, which might have been the case in Syria, sorry, or elsewhere, but here things are happening a little bit, at least in the light of this process. So. And obviously local oligarchs or these global powers, global oligarchs are fighting whoever who does not obey or listen to what the so far still dominant Western structures that consist of, let's say, accumulated whatever liberal capitalist fascist and so on streams, and their clients want and who they call those who not listen or obey or comply or walk the line, they usually call renegades. So this is the usual. This is perhaps the big plan, in the light of which this is happening. But when we apply the situation, this constellation or this constant struggle, which got only a little bit more, let's say, busted or boosted or let's say grown, with the weakening of the United States. When we come back to the Israel versus resistance or Palestine case. Um, there is one very important point, and that is that, in my opinion, Israel has been long trying to sell this fight, this conflict, as a conflict between a relatively secular, modern, European or Western like country, Israel in this case, or the Jewish state, uh, and radical Islam. So they have been trying to frame it as a fight against radical Islam. But what happens, in my opinion, actually, is something completely different. It's just local people or natives whose lands whose lands have been stolen and who are under pressure, in which definitely Israel has its hand, who face an imported enemy whose doctrine is purely religiously dogmatic. And this is Israel, and who in whose this religiously dogmatic doctrine, of course, the right to claim some land, some, let's say, not more or less arbitrarily chosen land, is a part of.
Okay, you ended with the conflict in the Middle East, and now there is a curious development in the Islamic Republic of Iran, where following the start of the Israeli war in Gaza, a moderate president was elected. This is Masoud Pezeshkian,
Mhm.
whose government says it is going to try to overcome Iran's isolation and renew the nuclear agreement with the West. So, how likely is it that, in the context of the rising anti Israeli sentiment among the people in the USA and Western Europe, Iran somehow manages to return to international relations as a partner, especially to the EU, and a force that supports stability and even maybe regional cooperation in the Middle East when war is raging in the region?
Vladimir, maybe I'll disappoint you, but I'm maybe a little bit conservative on this on this issue, or let's say I prefer to be consistent on this issue. You know, the actions of the axis of resistance and the export of revolution and the velayat faqih, doctrine and so on, they have been largely taken their legitimacy. They have been largely representing the sources of the legitimacy of not only Iran but mainly the Islamic Republic component of it, which is what basically Iran is these days. So my elementary thesis here is that if Iran now lets the axis of resistance down, if they betray the axis of resistance, it will mean the beginning of the end of the Islamic Republic. Further on, I'm afraid we are already in the time of settling the debts. I mean, I'm in the time of a hot war. So, this being the case, in my opinion, again, Iran's only chances to form a solid background with selected BRICS superpowers. You obviously know which countries I'm talking about. And this way, make sure to be supporting each other reciprocally, while or subsequently fully support the anti-Israeli regional resistance. Otherwise, Israel will use the vacuum and take the best possible advantage of it, of this situation, of this lack of support, the feeling of the lack of support. I mean, this may and may not change. This situation or constellation may and may not change with the U.S. presidential elections, or after the presidential elections in the United States. But I mean, today's hesitators are often tomorrow's weepers, And look, Israel didn't wait for the U.S. approval to invade Lebanon and so on whatsoever. So again, we come back to the old famous or infamous Putin's saying, "When the fight is inevitable, make sure to strike first."
Okay, you mentioned that Iran will not abandon its proxies in the region, and I'm curious to ask you to expand a little bit that, because usually or almost everyone speaks about Israeli-Iranian confrontation or even war in the Middle East, But I wonder, aren't the interests of the two countries or elements from them somehow or sometimes coinciding? For example, wouldn't Iran maybe be in a better international position if somehow Israel liberates it from its proxies?
Um, I mean, these proxies, who are they? They represent, in the first place, the goodwill of otherwise ordinary people who ventured or volunteered or just offered themselves to help the Islamic Republic in what it has been long claiming was its anti imperialist, anti neocolonialist, anti Zionist, and pro export of revolution struggle, and not vice versa. These people didn't come to Iran asking for help and so on. So it was Iran who initiated this and who dragged these people into this situation. So talking about these people as a burden only for the sake of two, so let's say, stubborn and abusive regimes as the Iranian and the Israeli as the Israeli are, is at least very, very ungrateful or cynical. I know how you mean it, obviously, but I mean, you just don't tell these people. I mean, it's over. I switch off the lights and go home. Thank you very much. I mean, these people have been, you know, in many cases, it has been the meaning of their life, and it has constituted something very essential and important in their life. And there are many things to it. They're not a burden. I mean, they're not a burden that was created out of nothing. Somebody came up with the idea of forming these battalions, and here we go back to Iran in the first place. So it was these people who brought the biggest sacrifices, and really not the often conceited and self-loving Iranian mullahs or the berserk Israeli war cabinet members. So if the members of the regional resistance understand that Iran let them down, it is the end of the legitimacy of the Iranian revolutionary regime, as well as of the justification of the mullahs and the Iranian Revolutionary Guards of what they use the people's money for, or these two things are linked, interrelated. I mean, in such a case, the Iranian regime will find itself emptied and it will implode. This means it is in their own interest to see the job they have been claiming was their ideological child done. Uh, and last but not least, I mean, the Iranians might wish to see Israel erased or defeated. Israel might wish to see the Shah coming back to Tehran, getting back on the throne, and so on. Both countries may also have other goals and plans, but the only fact is that the world really does not rotate around these two countries. So for me, the best conclusion would be if all their current leaders, I simply call toxic, all this generation, and it's not only these, it's others as well, would just leave the scene once forever, uh, that a moral, financial, or other settlement with those Palestinians who had been historically robbed or killed took place, and that normal people would be just let to breathe normally. That would be the perfect solution. I mean, at least from my point of view.
Finally, in July 2024, the Israeli parliament voted overwhelmingly against the establishment of the Palestinian state, rejecting the two state solutions. And in the beginning of October 2024, Israel banned the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, from entering Israel. So, in this context, what are the scenarios or the variants for the resolution of the Israeli Palestinian conflict and the future of the Middle East from now on?
Well, again, I mean, I maybe look at things in a very, very simplified way, but again, I just think that the violence obsessed or violence crazed, stricken Israeli cabinet will go only as far, again, they will go only as far as the Palestinians, resistance, Iranians, and the world will allow them to go, which may mean anything, literally anything, from stopping right now to, for example, leveling everything Palestinian, including the West Bank, which has been so far more or less untouched, to the ground. Look, already some 30% of Czechs, including our politicians, would do it equally like the Israelis do. I mean, which is obviously very much telling, or it's telling you something. I mean, namely that I may not be fantasizing or exaggerating at all. I mean, again, a certain role may be played by the after election US cabinet, or after by the US after the presidentials. But here again, we've seen already, or we saw already in back in 2000, what was it, 16 or something, that IPAC, the the main body that represents the Israeli interests in the United States, was able, very instrumentally, to swiftly jump from Obama to Trump and back to Biden, once jumping was what it took, or what it takes still onwards. So again, in the face of this unleashed, dogmatically religious and almost apocalyptical Israeli killing frenzy, I would very much recommend the resistance, the Iran Tehran operated resistance, to finally consolidate, both outwards and inwards, both outside and inside, open as many fronts as possible, and incur the enemy such blows that would clearly mark his place and limits, and maybe also announce the character of any possible future talks, future mutual talks. I'm not talking about destruction, but I mean, I'm talking about setting the limits for negotiations. And for these talks, and ideally for a settlement leading to a normal regional coexistence for everyone, but mostly, however, for ordinary people, for the ordinary citizens who are totally tired, broken, and fed up with the state of things that has been coming to this point, and to which so far no light at the end of the tunnel can be seen, unfortunately.
Okay, in the last 28 minutes, we discussed with Ondřej Krátky, a Czech expert on the Middle East, and we were looking for some hypothesis or hope that some light in the end of the tunnel, as he said, could appear. And after this talk, we again get the impression that the only thing that matters is brute force. And this is not optimistic, but in any case, Cross Border Talks is here to keep looking for complex interpretation. And we thank to Mr. Krotky for this participation.